Welcome back to TLDR's daily briefing for Tuesday the 22nd of April 2025. In today's episode, Trump's attack on the Federal Reserve Chair, Putin's potential openness to Ukraine talks, and Israel's killing of emergency workers in Gaza. But first, Pope Francis has died, aged 88. The Vatican has announced that the funeral of Pope Francis will be held this Saturday at 10 a.m. at St. Peter's Basilica. Cardinals met today to discuss and schedule the series of events that must follow the death of Pope Francis, including his funeral and burial and the papal conclave that will elect his successor. Pope Francis, at the age of 88, died on Monday morning of a stroke and subsequent heart failure, having served as the Bishop of Rome and head of the Catholic Church for 12 years. Despite recent periods of hospitalization and serious illness, including severe pneumonia, Pope Francis was able to make his final public appearance on Easter Sunday, when he overlooked St. Peter's Square in the Vatican City and blessed the 35,000 people who had gathered to celebrate Easter. In that final address, Francis, as he had done many times during his papacy, called for peace and an end to violence across the world, including in Ukraine, the Congo, and Sudan. He called for an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, for the release of the hostages, and for humanitarian aid to reach those starving in Gaza. Before his death, in keeping with his reputation for eschewing extravagance, Francis set out plans for a simplified funeral, foregoing much of the traditional pageantry. His body will be dressed in a simple white cassock and placed in a wooden coffin. He's also opted to be buried in Rome's Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, which would make him the first pope in a century to be interred outside the Vatican. Since his death, tributes have been paid from all around the world by both those inside and outside the 1.4 billion strong Catholic community, with many noting his historic role as the first pope from Latin America, praising his focus on poverty and vulnerability, peace and the environment, simplicity and humility, and his efforts to reform and modernize the church. Countries across the world have declared periods of mourning, including his native Argentina, Cuba, Poland, Hungary, India, and East Timor, to name just a few. With the throne of St. Peter now vacant, a conclave will gather in the days after Francis's burial to elect a new pope. The secretive process sees more than 100 cardinals under the age of 80 vote in successive rounds until a new pope is chosen with a 2/3 majority. If you're interested in finding out more about the conclave process, as well as some of the individuals who could emerge as the new pope, we'll link the video we made prior to Francis's death below. You're listening to TLDR's daily briefing. If you want more explainers on what's happening in the world, then you should check out TLDR's other channels. You can find the channels linked in the description or by searching for TLDR on YouTube or Nebula. Stock markets fell again, and gold hit a record $3,500 per troy ounce after US President Donald Trump attacked Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, for failing to cut interest rates. Trump claimed there is virtually no inflation and that the US central bank boss was a major loser. The S&P 500, which tracks 500 of the biggest US companies, fell roughly 2.4% on Monday. It's lost roughly 12% of its value since the start of the year. Meanwhile, the price of gold hit a new all-time high record, breaking the $3,500 per ounce mark as investors seek out so-called safe haven assets. Moving on now to Moscow, where Vladimir Putin has expressed for the first time in years a willingness to hold direct talks with Ukraine. According to the Kremlin spokesperson, after speaking to Russian state media yesterday, where Putin said he's interested in discussing the possibility to halt strikes on civilian infrastructure, he was referring to holding direct discussions with the Ukrainian side. Up until now, direct talks between the two sides have not been held since the early weeks following Moscow's full-scale invasion in February 2022. This change in tone comes as the US has taken a more forceful stance on peace negotiations. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned last week that Washington could withdraw its mediation efforts within days if there's no visible progress. Over the weekend, President Donald Trump also voiced his frustration over the stalling of negotiations and echoed Rubio's sentiment.
If for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass. But hopefully we won't have to do that.
Talks are expected to continue between various parties this week, and many hope that the possible restarting of bilateral communications between Kiev and Moscow could finally draw a path to peace. Finally, for today, the Israeli military admitted on Sunday that following a review into the murder of emergency responders in Gaza, that they found that there had been, quote, several professional failures. In the early hours of March the 23rd, Israeli forces killed 15 unarmed paramedics and first responders before crushing the ambulances, fire trucks and UN vehicle they'd been travelling in and burying them in a shallow grave. They were found a week later by officials from the UN and Palestinian Red Crescent who described the killings as a massacre and said the incident raised further concerns over the commission of war crimes by the Israeli military. The IDF said it identified breaches of orders and a failure to fully report what had happened, and that a deputy commander will be dismissed, but denied an attempt to cover it up and said troops had not fired indiscriminately. The IDF's account of what had happened also changed multiple times after it emerged that there were multiple elements to the account that contradicted the earlier versions. The Red Crescent said last week that a paramedic who survived the attack was being held in Israeli custody, and the organisation raised the question, if the teams are really targeted by mistake, why does Israel continue to hold the paramedic captive? That's all for today. We'll be back with you tomorrow, so make sure you subscribe wherever you listen. In the meantime, if you want to support the show, then consider grabbing a copy of our physical magazine, Too Long. The latest edition, which came out last week, covers the world's 25 most influential people, as ranked by us, the TLDR team, and you, the TLDR audience. Inside, we unpack who these influential people are, explain how they got their influence, and tell stories about how they choose to wield this immense power. The entire thing is beautifully designed, contains a bunch of other stories, and runs over 72 pages of our best journalism. If you're interested, then use code TLDRDaily at checkout to get £2 off your copy, which brings the cost of a subscription down as low as £5.99. Buying Too Long helps fund all of our journalism, so make sure you check it out. You'll also find links in the podcast description. This was a TLDR news production hosted by Ben Blissett, written by Rory Taylor and Nadja Lovadinov, and produced by Scarlett Watchorn. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again tomorrow.